and I want to thank you all for coming out for what I think promises to be a most fascinating discussion this evening. I should like in particular to recognize several current and former members of the House and Senate who are here. I'm not sure that I see them all, though, or recognize all of them. Bob Carr, I know I saw right here. If there are others, please raise your hand, announce your voice, and Phil Rupee, right. Well, glad to have you here. And I want to thank the National Press Club for hosting this evening's event, being held under the sponsorship, as you can see, of the John Bradema Center for the Study of Congress of New York University. By way of background, I note that after 22 years of service in the House of Representatives from 1959 to 1981, from the then 3rd District of Indiana, centering on South Bend, I was, in my campaign for a 12th term, defeated in Ronald Reagan's landslide victory over President Carter. Shortly thereafter, I was invited to become president of New York University, a position in which I served until 1992, when I became president emeritus, my present position. In Congress, I served on 3 committees: Education and Labor, House Administration, and the joint, that is to say, House-Senate Committee on the Library of Congress. And in my last 4 years, I was the Majority Whip of the House of Representatives, part of the Democratic leadership. As I've just told our Speaker, in my last 4 years as the Whip, I would every other Thursday go to the White House to join Tip O'Neill, the Speaker, who appointed me, and Jim Wright, Texas, the Majority Leader, and Bob Byrd, the Senate Majority Leader, West Virginia, and Alan Cranston, California, the Senate Whip, for breakfast at the White House with President Carter and Vice President Mondale. All Democrats. We talk politics and policy. And as I am a note-taker by nature, I would sit there and make careful notes and then go back to my office on the Hill and dictate them. So I have a stack of transcripts that at some point, maybe enough time has elapsed now, I'd like to turn into a book on the nature, in effect, through at least that mode of the relationship between a president and the leaders of his own party in Congress. So you will not, in light of these words of background, be surprised to hear me say that my principal project has been at NYU now, at our Robert F. Graduate School of Public Service, the establishment of a center for the study of the Congress of the United States, of Congress as a policy-making institution. I remind you that in our separation of powers constitutional system, when it comes to making national policy, Congress, unlike the House of Commons, for example, in the British parliamentary system, counts. If a senator or representative knows what he or she is doing, and if the configuration of political forces at the time make action possible, that senator or representative can, without picking up the telephone to call the White House, write the laws of the land. Now, with 100 senators and 435 representatives, and normally no strict party discipline, Congress is not an easy institution to understand, even for informed persons. So what we've done at New York University is establish a center to which we have invited senators and representatives, current and former, Democrats, Republicans. This is not a partisan initiative. Cabinet officers, congressional staffers, journalists, students, and scholars to discuss the processes, the ways by which our national legislature influences and shapes policy, as well as significant issues of public policy. The purpose of the center is to encourage the exchange of ideas among scholars and policymakers, thereby promoting the creation and dissemination of knowledge and public understanding of what is, after all, the first branch of government. As I've said, the center is wholly nonpartisan, and I've been gratified by the acceptance of several distinguished senators and representatives, current and former, of both parties, of my invitation to serve on an advisory council to the center even as I appreciate the agreement of a number of the nation's leading academic authorities on Congress to serve on this council. Over the past 3 years, the Bradema Center has held numerous public programs in New York and Washington, sponsored research by scholars, and organized an internship program on Capitol Hill. I hope you will stay interested in our center by supporting our programs and taking part in our upcoming activities, and I thank you again for joining us tonight. Our speaker this evening began his distinguished career at the Washington Post in 1963 as an intern and now holds the position of associate editor. His tenure at the Post has included serving as foreign correspondent in London, Saigon during the Vietnam War, and Moscow during the Nixon-Kissinger era of détente. In 1975, he returned to Washington as a senior reporter on national politics, covering labor, Congress, the 1980 election, and the first years of the Reagan administration. He has served as managing editor of the Washington Post as well as editor of the paper's Sunday Outlook section. He is author or co-author of 7 books, including with his wife Hannah, Russia from the Inside, and with Leonard Downey Jr., The News About the News, American Journalism in Peril, which in 2002 won Harvard University's Goldsmith Prize for the best book on politics and the news media. He's with us this evening to discuss his latest book, So Damn Much Money, The Triumph of Lobbying and the Corrosion of American Government. A seasoned Washington observer, obviously, he tells the story of how, as the impact of the federal government on the lives of Americans grew, an array of organized special interests began to look to Washington for protection or assistance. In particular, he looks at how fundraising and campaign contributions have influenced the political process. Indeed, as we meet while Congress is working on one of the biggest domestic issues it's tackled in many years, the health care reform, our speaker's analysis of the power of lobbyists may offer us some insight into how this debate will turn out. I shouldn't put him on the spot that way. His book has earned praise from both Democrats and Republicans. To quote former Senator Chuck Hagel of Nebraska, Bob Kaiser takes the reader past the cliches and caricatures of Washington and tells a very human story. He leaves the reader with an understanding of how it is possible the American government has reached a point where it now struggles to meet our most basic challenges. Kaiser calls upon a deep understanding of Washington and a writer's gift for telling a fascinating but true story. This is an important and compelling book. Ladies and gentlemen, after we've heard from our speaker, we shall entertain questions. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to introduce a good friend of many years, tonight's distinguished speaker, Robert Kaiser.
When John called and asked me to appear tonight, I was thrilled. I also welcome the opportunity to thank him on behalf of my colleagues at the Washington Post and other journalistic outlets for a great service he did his country, which is not widely appreciated yet. But someday we'll make him famous for it. But John, among his many skills as a legislator, was a great note taker. And if there was an important meeting at the White House that he was a part of, David Broder actually explained this to me years ago. Call Bradema, see if he took notes. He often did, and he often generously shared them. So thank you, John, for that. He's got a lot of those notes, which will make a good book someday. I hope it happens. I'm always pleased, like any author, to talk about my book. I've learned over the last months of going around the country talking about it that some authors have an easier time than others bragging about what they've written. When I say others, of course, I mean me. It's my own fault. I could have tried to write a biography of a lobbyist, or a history of lobbying, or a political analysis of what's happened in Washington, or an entertaining narrative about some episodes of Washington events, or a morality tale. But instead, I try to do all those things at once in this big book called So Damn Much Money. My ambition was large. I was born in this town and grew up here. I've worked for the Post, as you heard, for an awfully long time, 46 years. I've been a student of Washington all my adult life. My ambition was to explain what's happened in this city and in our national politics in the last 40 years or so that I've been professionally watching it. I'm sorry that we can't shut up the next room, but I think it's beyond our capacity to do so. I'm a storyteller, and I knew that I needed some kind of a storytelling device to fulfill this ambition. And I picked on one individual as to be my vehicle, my literary helper. A little known but extremely successful lobbyist in town, a little better known now that a book has been written about him, called Gerald Cassidy. This is a guy who has accumulated a fortune of more than $100 million by playing the Washington game extremely well. Cassidy's Stories is my biographic bit. He's kind of a governing metaphor here. I was very fortunate to find him, and more fortunate when I persuaded him to actually cooperate with me. We spent dozens of hours together, me, Jerry, and my tape recorder, and I'm extremely grateful to him for all his generous contribution. He didn't have to do it, and I'm sure he didn't entirely like the result, but he made this thing possible. I think of Cassidy as kind of a Jay Gatsby for modern Washington, a completely self-invented character who came out of nowhere to do extremely well. He defies many of the stereotypes of the fat cat Washington lobbyist. He's a liberal Democrat. He got rich representing good guys, mostly universities and colleges. Not NYU, but Columbia and many others. But in other respects, he does live up to the stereotypes. For example, he and his wife have together given almost $2 million to candidates for public office since 1979. They built an $8 million country estate on the Chesapeake Bay on the eastern shore of Maryland. He's a principal owner of a very snazzy Washington restaurant that some of you know, Charlie Palmer, down on Pennsylvania Avenue. He's owned skyboxes in the athletic arenas, and he drives around town in a chauffeur limousine. He wears $2,500 suits made for him by Alan Flusser, a snazzy tailor in New York. Cassidy embodies two of my favorite theories about my hometown. First is that Washington is as close as we get in America, really, to the mythical even playing field. Anybody can compete here and win. Even a nobody like Jerry Cassidy from the wrong side of the tracks in Red Hook, Brooklyn, New York. Second theory that I'm fond of, which I think his story illustrates, is that in the modern era, since about the time Jimmy Carter was elected president, Washington has become an important venue for the great American pastime, which is not baseball, but making money. Cassidy provides a kind of literary adhesive for my story as a central figure whose story who recurs through the book. But I've interwoven his story with history, with the story of how our politics have been transformed over the last 4 decades. And I should confess that I don't think it's been a transformation for the better. On the contrary, I often refer to this as the period in which our politics descended into the toilet.